the comments submitted by San Francisco Baykeeper. This include the removal of the phrase or any pesticide in the same chemical family is unlawful without adequate justification. The permit should concentrate on eliminating mosquito larvae and not applying adulticides. And the State Water Board staff should first study impacts before adopting the proposed change. Staff's response to San Francisco Baykeeper's comments is no current evidence that vector control pesticide discharges will significantly increase, cause serious impacts, or seriously threaten water quality if the amended permit is adopted. Except for malathion and permethrin, no other permitted adulticide active ingredient is causing impairment of California surface water bodies. And the impairment by malathion and permethrin is not directly related to vector control programs.
What is it related to?
Agriculture and urban runoff.
Okay.
Now, it responds furthermore, restricting the ability of vector control agencies to effectively control mosquitoes and protect public health is not an intended consequence of the permit. Not amending the permit could lead to unacceptable risks to public health. And the State Water Board's role is to regulate pollutant discharges, not to promote specific mosquito control techniques. I have some final notes before I turn the table to the questions. And as you've seen in the slides, among the active ingredients listed in the permit, only malathion and permethrin are listed as a source of impairment in our surface waters. The response to comments erroneously states that only malathion among the active ingredients in the permit is causing impairment. So it's also permethrin.
Could you repeat that last statement, please, comparing malathion and permethrin?
That the slides only mention, the response to comments only mention malathion as causing the impairment. We want to make that correction and add permethrin as well.
And how many water bodies in the state are affected by either or both of these two compounds? Do you have a map or an overlay of that?
Looking at the list, I think we found about 3 or 4 creeks.
That's not correct. The combined number of impaired water bodies by organophosphates and pyrethroids is 255 water bodies.
But for malathion alone?
For malathion alone, just 3 water bodies. And
For the other chemical?
I'm sorry?
For
3 for malathion. How many
for
permethrin?
For permethrin, there are 4 water bodies that are
So
impaired.
7.
7 altogether.
Or is it 7 altogether or a couple of them combined?
That's 7 altogether. 3 by malathion and 4 by permethrin.
None of them are a combination of the two.
No.
No overlap.
No.
So if one was affected or listed for malathion, it wouldn't preclude the use of permethrin, and vice versa. If it was listed for permethrin, it wouldn't exclude the use of malathion. Is that
That's
correct?
correct, because they are in different chemical families.
So none of the impaired water bodies would be precluded from the use of one or the other of those two products. Is that correct?
That's correct, but
Not-
that's not really the issue. The issue
I
is
understand that, but
okay,
there
sorry.
is no water body in the state of California that would be precluded because of a 303 delisting from the use of either malathion or permethrin.
That's not correct, because malathion is an organophosphate, and a lot of our water bodies are listed for chlorpyrifos and diazinon and other organophosphates, and those water bodies would be precluded by or application of malathion and the other active ingredient listed in the permit, which is NALED.
But
would
on
be
those water bodies, they could use a permethrin.
correct.
That's what I was saying.
Correct.
I didn't express myself well. Thank you.
Permethrin or pyrethroids.
And one last note, there are minor typos in the response to comments, and staff would like to correct the final version. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Shanahan, would you like to come first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Again, I'm Dick Shanahan, General Counsel to the Mosquito and Vector Control Association of California, which is a statewide nonprofit group that represents the interests of mosquito and vector control districts in the state, somewhat akin to the aqua of mosquitoes. And the association, through its executive director, we submitted a comment letter on March 12th, and I won't go into that in detail. First of all, I'd like to thank your state board staff for cooperating with us in recent months on refining this permit as we continue to evaluate and evolve it. We're seeing it could be made more workable, and we really appreciate your state board staff's efforts in working with us. I'm accompanied today by some technical folks in the room, including folks with our NPDES permit committee, as well as our president of the association. If there's any technical questions that I get in over my head, they can assist. Firstly, I just want to comment that we support the proposed staff amendment and urge the board to make the change. In particular, the clarifying the restriction on applications around 303 distilled waters is essential. Without that change, there will be a significant reduction on the ability of many of our members to apply adult mosquito control. In many of these creeks are found in urban areas, including a lot of neighborhoods around Sacramento and Placer counties. So we urge the state board to adopt that change as proposed by staff. We've also looked at the two change sheets and are agreeable with the changes in the two change sheets. Next, I'd like to comment on there's been some discussion, and I think maybe an impression that the permit's not that big a deal and it's not going to be that burdensome on mosquito control. And I'd just like to refute that and just explain to the board where this new regime is leading mosquito control in the state of California, because I think it's important that the board members know. And with the new permit, each vector control district in the state is going to do need to make a lot of affirmative changes to the way they do things. First of all, we now need to educate field control staff on what's a water body of the United States. That's not an easy thing. So we've got field technicians in the boots out there in the field. They need to know what is and what is not a water body of the U.S., and there's education that needs to happen there. Secondly, on the 303 distilled waterways, districts need to evaluate those maps and the restrictions and how that impairs, and how far upstream do you need to go, and how that impairs how they apply, or what they can apply or cannot apply. Thirdly, we need to train each field staff member about the detailed requirements of the permit. Fourth, each district must prepare, implement, and monitor compliance with a new detailed pesticide application plan. Fifth, we now need to prepare and maintain expanded pesticide application logs. Six, we have created a statewide monitoring coalition. All the districts need to participate in and fund that statewide coalition for physical and chemical monitoring. Seven, there is some monitoring that falls down to each individual member district, which is particularly onerous, we find, and that has to do with the larvicide monitoring. Each district must monitor 10% of all application areas for visual monitoring of the application areas. And to put that in a real-world example, I'll pick on the local Sacramento-Yolo Mosquito and Vector Control District. They have about 1,000 regular application areas in the two-county area that the field members must go out to regularly. So for all these 1,000 areas, you take 10% of that, and that's 100. So 100 of these sites need to have this very specific pre-event and post-event monitoring. And pesticide applications aren't made once a year. They're made several times a year often. And so you've got 100 sites, you've got several applications a year, you've got pre-post and event monitoring. This is hundreds of additional field trips need to be made out to these sites to handle the larvicide monitoring. And that's just one example. Eighth, we now need to prepare and maintain detailed monitoring logs. And finally, there's new requirements to compile, submit, and maintain other various reports and paperwork. Next, I just want to comment on the cost of this. The State Department of Public Health has looked into and made a cost estimate from their perspective and have come up with a figure which to me I think is low and on the conservative side, but this is from CDPH, and their cost all in is about $1.3 million per year for these additional monitoring and implementation costs.
Can you clarify for our
Sure.
audience, often when we talk about conservative in business, we talk about minimal. When we talk about conservative numbers in a regulatory environment, we're usually talking about numbers that are so inflated that we know that we're being conservative. Would you clarify that for people so
I
they don't
think
get
the 1.3 million will be low. And that
will be low.
will be low because there's such high uncertainty out there about what individual districts will need to do to comply with the permit, and that once the districts have had to rededicate, you know, staff, and it's a hard number to get a handle on because there's not going to be sort of an additional expenditure of money. It's more really a reallocation of existing staff.
Okay, thank you.
Speaking of money, the mosquito districts, as you may know, are primarily property tax funded. As every other local agency in the state of California in recent years, they've really taken a hit on their property tax revenues in recent years. So in this stage of declining revenues, the districts are having to redivert more money, more resources to NPDES permit regulatory costs, which have the effect of reduced level of service and increased risk to public health. Now, the association acknowledges that in the state we have problems with pesticides in many of our creeks, especially in many of our urban creeks, and but we submit, and I think your state board staff would agree to us, that the mosquito larvicide products that we typically use are not the big part of the problem. We kind of know where the problem is, and there's existing statewide efforts going on, you know, such as the DPR Surface Water Protection Program that they're undertaking in coordination with the state board, and we think there's better tools to use to try to get a handle on what's causing the pesticide problems in our creeks and what we can do about it, and we don't see a real connection of the dots between the monitoring that you're going to have the mosquito districts do and how that's going to relate to any water quality improvement with this information. In our comment letter, we made some specific requests, and one of the requests we want to focus on is we've asked for the removal of the visual and physical monitoring of larvicides. We don't view the larvicide activities that we do as any problem whatsoever with the water bodies in the state, and in fact you should encourage us to do more larviciding, because the more larviciding our members are able to do, that means the less adulticiding they have to do if the mosquitoes come off the water as adults. In particular, it's the post-event monitoring that strikes us as a very unworthwhile effort. So the permit requires 10% of all application areas. For Sackule, that's 100 application areas. They need to go back after the application, and these products are intended to be effective in the water sometimes for many weeks. So the districts are going to come back many weeks, maybe even months later, to the same water body, and they're going to look at they're going to check the weather and say, okay, it's raining today, and they're going to look at the water and they're going to say, yeah, the water's still brown. And they're going to write that into a log and submit that and go on to their duty. For every one of those trips that a field technician needs to make to decide what the weather is at that location, and to look at the water condition and just make a visual observance, the water's brown, it's green, it's clear. We question what use that data is going to be for anybody. Where's that data going to go? Is it going to be used by anybody? Is it going to be useful to anybody? We really don't think so. And so we really question the need for the larviciding. We also have requested that, as we're going through the process today, one of the changes in the permit that's proposed by your staff is to add some pesticides to the various appendices, and we again urge your board to approve those changes. But we also ask that maybe you could direct your staff to come up with a more delegate to your staff the authority to make these changes. Pesticide products aren't added all the time. It's, as you know, it's very difficult to get new products approved in the state and in the country. But as the products are approved, it seems there ought to be a better mechanism for staff to review and add those if they've been through the regulatory approval process and they've been reviewed and approved by the state board staff. Perhaps we don't need to come to the state board itself every time to amend the permit to add new products. So we do request the state board perhaps could direct your staff to do that. And then finally, as we put in the close of the letter, we just wanted to sort of make almost the political statement that we're cooperating with your staff and we're collaborating, but the membership is not happy about this. We continue our efforts in Congress to try to get the Clean Water Act changed. We really view this as a round hole in a square peg situation. It's going to be very difficult to reconcile NPDES permit regulation with mosquito and vector control aquatic pesticides. We are going to take we've been looking at since you acted on your permit back in spring of 2011, the federal government, US EPA, has completed its efforts and has come up with the US EPA model permit that's probably going to be the permit that, or something close to it, that's going to apply in the vast majority of the states. And we will be coming back to the state board in months ahead to request the state board to give serious look at revising our California NPDES permit to be more similar to what's becoming the national model. I recognize that may be an uphill.
What if you don't like the national model?
What if we don't like?
Are you still going to come back to us and ask to have it?
Well, we do like the national model.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and like I said, we recognize that's an uphill thing, but we feel we sort of really owe it to the public whose health we're trying to protect, to try to limit the diversion of effort towards permit and regulatory activities. So with that, I again thank you for your time and thank State Board staff for working with us on these amendments. And
You realize, Mr. Shanahan, because of federal mandates and time frames, we have no choice but to be here today. I think in some respects you'd have to say it was to your advantage, or we would have another big void sitting out there. So we've done our best to try and craft this in a way that allows you to be functional. So.
And we do recognize and we do appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
I have a couple of comments on Mr. Shanahan's comments. Michael, I think his request for adding newly approved products, to the approved list if they have gone through DPR should be just a clerical addition. Is there any reason why we can't do that? Because we're not, obviously if they're new products, we're not dealing with products that are on a listed.
Yeah, I guess there are two problems that I see initially, and I want to alert the board to both of them. The first issue is you often hear me talk about the changes we can make as we go into a board meeting based on the comments we receive. And if the board were considering issuance of this permit in the first instance, we have kind of broader latitude because all the different pieces of the permit are in play. One thing I would say in this situation that makes it a little bit different is there was a fairly narrow reopen. When you have a permit, it's an entitlement for 5 years basically and can only be reopened and modified under limited circumstances. And staff thought that there was an appropriate basis and a need to reopen this permit, and so they issued a notice of permit modification under the existing permit for fairly narrow grounds, and so people are really only on notice about the specific issue before the board, which is the addition of the additional adulticides, or the removal of the language, I should say, about family. So I do have some concern from a procedural perspective about changes today that go beyond that, because people weren't commenting on that, and it would not really be a logical outgrowth of this particular notice. Obviously, if that's something the board is interested in, you can direct staff and we can go back and consider a subsequent notice, or it's something, the permit has a limited shelf life that can be addressed either once US EPA adopts a national model or when the board has to reissue this permit. With respect to specifically adding new constituents that get registered with DPR, it seems like a common sense approach, but this is one of those areas where it is technically an amendment to the NPDES permit. And again, at that point in time, we have to go through a federal process and determine whether or not it would be a minor modification under the US EPA regulations. And at this point in time, it's also something that was beyond the scope of what we had noticed up. There may be some policy concerns, and staff may want to discuss them if we ever got to that situation where we were considering that language, because we simply, whereas at this point in time, we have a fairly good sense about the particular pesticides, or I should say adulticides and larvicides that are being permitted by this particular action. We don't know what could be approved down the road, and there's some significant policy issues about whether or not the board would want to push that down to the staff level.
I guess that's where we have a few attorneys mixed in with the farmers just to give balance to all this. Now, I assume the same requisites would deal, well, I mean, if we had, if DPR were to register a new synthetic pyrethroid in the next year or two before there was any look given at the federal permit, it would require a reopening of this to add that?
It would, and if we saw one of those come down the line, though, I mean, it seems like that would be a very good opportunity, both for the association as well as staff, to get ahead of the issue. And if we really thought that it was appropriate at that point in time to reopen the permit, that might be a good place to consider fairly carefully and thoughtfully how we could go about delegating that down to the staff level and giving staff the direction to approve it in conformance with the federal regulations. So, you know, this is something we can remain vigilant on, and we can work with the association. If we see one of those new registrations coming down the road, we can look proactively about both putting out a notice of reopener as well as perhaps adding flexibility in at that point in time.
Mr. Shanahan, for good reason, I wasn't given the answer I hoped I would get. I would hope the answer that I received gives you a degree of comfort. And you probably understand the implications as well.
Yes, it does, and
I
I agree with Mr. Lawford. That's all we're really requesting today would be maybe state board staff, you know, nod in direction to your staff that, yeah, this is a good idea. And I think maybe when the next pesticides come along to add to the permit, you couple that with a proposed new provision to provide delegation and some standard to measure that delegation of authority would be appropriate, and that would be what we request.
Thank you. Phil, also there was comments made about the benefits of the physical post-larvicide applications. Can you counter those opinions and tell us a little bit about the value and what we will do with the database of, of these post-larvicide and physical and visual monitorings?
Certainly. In the 2004 permit, which was the previous permit that was replaced by the current permit, there was a monitoring provision to let me back up. The requirements of the 2004 permit were very minimal, and even though there were many minimal requirements in that permit, the implementation of the permit was very spotty at best, because at that time there was a lot of confusion on whether pesticide applicators need an NPDES permit or whether they would go by EPA's pesticide aquatic rule, which basically deferred to FIFRA and which said that compliance with the FIFRA label means you didn't need to get a permit. So we don't have the data to make a determination on whether larvicide applications cause water quality problems. We have received reports from the regional boards that they've seen and also received reports from their communities regarding mosquito control applications. And the most prevalent reports that I've received from the regional boards is that and I think these are larviciding applications, they would see waters that are milky after application, and some sheen on the receiving water. And so obviously those are impacts to receiving waters and would be considered nuisance. And because we have a provision in a permit that the application shall not create nuisance, then that type of application would be a violation of the permit. But again, I cannot make a firm determination because, as I've said, we don't have the data. And so this permit requires that we collect the data.
How long would you estimate it's going to take to gather enough data to see whether these citizens' reports of milky water and things are valid, or whether they're just something that people decide they want to call and complain about. I mean, obviously there's an expense to this. If there's something valid to it, I certainly understand the need for looking at it, but I would hope it's not just something we do because we can do it.
In the previous year, because of the extension of the Sixth Circuit Court's stay through October 31st, I don't think there was much monitoring conducted. And so we're practically just going into the first year of implementation of this permit. And I would say at least a couple of seasons to find out if the larviciding applications are causing impacts.
Okay. Brent, you have a question?
Just as a follow-up to that, it does seem to me that there are several things that are going to be coming down the pike in the next several years. The federal permit template that I assume you're going to be looking at to see how, well, tell me, I mean, have you seen it? And
The federal permit is in place. It's effective. It came out, I think, either December or early this year, but there was something happened in February 28th, I think, something to do with making it final. So the federal permit is out, but that permit is only applicable to the 6 states and U.S. territories that don't have the authority to write their own permits. And the federal permit is not protective of our water quality, or will not be protective of our water quality if we adopted it, because it only requires visual monitoring and only requires monitoring for those facilities that meet a certain threshold. So if you're a facility that's below a certain threshold, you don't even need to submit a notice of intent to get enrolled in the permit. You're automatically enrolled. And
so
honestly, to me, it's just a paper exercise.
Now we understand why people like it. Okay.
Thank you. Dave Tomeo.
I want to thank the board for allowing me to address this item, and also I wanted to thank staff for accommodating our
and that is, even as we continue to make investment.
Yeah. You think people don't listen to our meetings, I'll tell you what here.
That's
What that guy
humbling.
was so irritated about. He gotten bit by a mosquito, I bet, huh?
Anyway, do we have the bill?
Guess it could have been worse, couldn't it?
Okay, I'm not sure how
I
to
mean,
get
you haven't
this.
been watching those movies again, have you?
I'm not sure how to get this
No.
started, so. Okay. My name's Dave Tamayo, and I'm an environmental specialist with the County of Sacramento Stormwater Program, and I'm here today representing the California Stormwater Quality Association. I'm the co-chair of their pesticides subcommittee. Staff has already mentioned that there's an awareness throughout the state that water bodies that are impaired for both OP pesticides and pyrethroids interfere with the ability of mosquito districts to do their mosquito control operations. And this is just a slide that shows that graphically areas that in Sacramento County that are impaired for those pesticides, where past applications by the local district would not be legal under the current permit. Now, you may very well be aware of this slide. This is a study that was conducted by your staff, the Surface Water Ambient Monitoring Program, and it showed pyrethroid toxicity in urban water bodies throughout the state. And you can see with the orange and red dots, those are significant levels of pyrethroid toxicity that were specifically identified in urban water bodies. And as you can imagine, those are going to lead to eventually those will lead to 303D listings of impaired water bodies, which is why stormwater is concerned with it. Now, we've been working on this issue for a long time, and we're aware, and based on various academic studies and studies by state and federal agencies and our own studies, that structural pesticide applications, in particular those that are made to control ants, are the cause of the impairments that we're seeing throughout the state in our water bodies. Sorry. And we've been working on these types of issues, beginning with OP impairments, since the mid-1990s, and we came to the conclusion back then, in conjunction with regional board staff in Central Valley and in the Bay Area, that the Clean Water Act provisions, including NPDES requirements, won't by themselves solve the level of impairment that we're seeing. And because these are pesticide issues, effective pesticide regulation is what's going to solve these impairments. And we're not just finger pointing. We've been working on this. We've been working on the nuts and bolts of how do we use pesticide regulations to effectively address these issues. And I'm talking about this because I want you to understand the limitations of the current permit that you have, and also the limitations that we have as stormwater agencies to address these impairments. And I wanted to emphasize that we've made significant progress. You're probably aware that the Department of Pesticide Regulation has done a number of things in recent years, most notably the surface water protection regulations, which we hope will be finalized this summer. We think that and in conjunction with bifenthrin label changes, which is the primary source of toxicity in these urban waters, and that's primarily for structural pesticide applications, that in conjunction, those two things we believe will solve the current pyrethroid impairments. I wanted to point out that in the past, in the late 1990s, a decision was made by EPA and the pesticide registrants to remove diazinon and chlorpyrifos, which was the cause of most of the OP impairments throughout the state. They removed those from the urban market. And you can see in 2004, those levels dropped below the yellow line, which is the water quality objective for diazinon. And it's a similar situation for chlorpyrifos. And we see basically similar situations throughout the state, where pesticide regulation is what solved the water quality impairments. I wanted to point out that in the near horizon, and excuse me, I'm not really used to this type of thing, we're already seeing the replacement active ingredient causing or approaching water quality impairments. And that's one reason why we think, instead of being in reactive mode for pesticide regulations through the NPDES process, it makes much more sense to get ahead of the curve. You can see that that particular active ingredient is being used much more. So what we're requesting is that we get ahead of the curve, and instead of being on the downward slope of this and reacting to water quality impairments, which takes a long time and is very burdensome for local agencies, that we need your support in working with the Office of Pesticide Programs and with DPR in continuing to make improvements that actually prevent pesticide impairments in urban waterways rather than reacting to them. And that's the most effective way. And I'm talking about this in this particular setting because I want you to understand just really the real way that the most important, or a very important thing that the State Water Board can do, and it's crucial as the lead water quality agency for the state of California, that we have active participation by your staff and management in supporting the efforts to change how pesticides are regulated to prevent these water quality impairments. And I welcome any questions.
Yeah, I would like to make a comment on that. I agree with you in many respects. I mean, I would think if you made a generalization, the vector districts, particularly as it relates to pyrethroids, I don't know if it would be the case with malathion, have been drug into something because of a great deal of urban contamination and certainly ag runoff to a degree, but DPR's studies in the last few years showed that there was a significant amount of runoff from urban environments, not only from pest control activities around structures, but from home use of pyrethroids and cans and what have you. And I don't think anybody's come to grips with that. So certainly if these numbers go down, I think it's a very reasonable request to come back and, ask for modifications. And certainly you would have our support in looking at the overall spectrum of use of pyrethroids in the system, so that the vector districts that do provide such a critical portion of, public health protection to our economy aren't, ostracized because of something someone else is doing. So that information is important coming forward. Thank you.
I'd like to hear from staff, or I assume you are working with our sister agency.
Yes, we are. In fact, we have an MOA with DPR. I'm not the
Are
representative.
but are we actively engaged in?
Yes.
I mean,
Absolutely.
there's a new
Yes.
head of Brian Leahy's the new head, and so
We've been working with them on the urban pesticide issue. Darren started having conversations with them a few years ago, and Tom Mumley and the AEOs have been working with them closely, and we're starting to work with them on the ag pesticide issue too. I've been meeting with, the staff's been meeting at the staff level, and then I met with Chuck Andrews a year ago, and again more recently, and John met with him about a week ago.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
I just wanted to make sure that the board was aware of how important it is that staff continue to be empowered to participate with us in this, and how your agency's participation really is key, and even with diminishing budgets, this is strategically a very effective way of addressing this problem.
Certainly, I think we're all aware that we have unintended consequences in restricting the use of particular materials that are restricted for one reason, and it doesn't mean that the need goes away, so industry switches to another product, whether it's the switch from carbofuran to fipronil or the switch from organophosphates to pyrethroids. It's going to happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Butner.
Yes, good morning, Chairman Hoppen and members of the board. My name is Paul Butner with the California Rice Commission. The Rice Commission represents all the rice growers in California. We have had a long ongoing relationship with vector control in all the areas that we do produce rice. We rely upon them to assist us in keeping mosquitoes under control. I was encouraged by reading the notice of this hearing, because we've been hearing of late that if this issue was not addressed, that the vector districts may be reliant in many cases on just larviciding, when the most cost-effective way of controlling mosquitoes that are coming off of rice may well be adulticiding in many cases. From the presentation of your staff, it appears to me that if this change is approved, that there would be no circumstances where the vector districts would be forced into the higher cost method of controlling mosquitoes. And if my assumption is not correct, I'd appreciate maybe some further advice from your staff or whatever. Those are the only comments that I have.
Thank you, Paul.
And Paul, I'd like to thank you for coming today to get clear about this, because so many times we find in other issues, not this one in particular, but people make up their minds as to what's going on and then just go crazy and don't really find out what's happening before they go crazy. So thank you.
Like I said, I was encouraged to understand what the real situation is today.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. With that, I would like to make one generic comment. We regulate a lot of people here, and it's not always a lot of fun. Certainly, if you could express, Mr. Shanahan, to the vector districts, I know some of your folks are here. I appreciate you not bringing busloads, to tell you the truth, and mosquitoes with live Arnold Schwarzenegger-looking mosquitoes on them. I appreciate that very much, but we appreciate what you folks do for the people of the state of California, and we realize you don't have an easy job. And putting my other hat on in life, and that is from agriculture, I realize that anytime anything other than passengers comes out of an airplane, people assume the worst when they see them flying over. So it's not our intention to try and make your lives impossible. It is to try and protect water quality, certainly, but hopefully with the amendments the staff has come forward with, we have given you a viable approach. And if we get to a point where there are new products available that aren't on this list, or there becomes very clear to staff and us that something that we've asked you to do is untenable, certainly we aren't going to be closed-minded about that. But with that comment, if my colleagues have other comments?
I have one request, and that is that as the data does come in on the post-application evaluation, visual evaluation, as that information comes in at the end of this year, if you could just, again, through perhaps Tom's report, his monthly report, give us an update as to what you're finding. And I know you said it needed 2 years, and I agree with you. I think 2 years will be important. But let's get just a reminder to us as to that you have looked at the data, that it is being evaluated, and that what you expect to get from the next year's data. Just a little update would be helpful.
Definitely. I'd be glad to come back here about this time of the year next year and give you a report on
Thank you.
the monitoring.
Thank you for that question, Fran. I appreciate it.
I'll move adoption of the item with the 2 change sheets.
Second.
And then just
Oh, and also the pyrethrin addition to
Right.
the
Well, we would correct the change sheet as noted by Renan, but I also wanted to clarify that in his presentation he had proposed one change to change sheet number 1, item 2, the second paragraph. There is a statement toward the bottom. It says this indicates that they are not, or they are likely not a water quality concern. They wanted to delete that at the request of, I believe, Region 2.
Okay.
So I would add that.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Thank you, staff. Thank you for being flexible on this, Phil. The first iteration of this caused everyone a great deal of digestive constraint, and I think you've done your best to make this palatable. So
And thank you for the great job on the response to comments, too.
thank you all.
Thanks.
And Tom Howard has excused himself. I'm sorry to say there isn't an executive director's report that I could talk about at length, but
That's it? You get paid for that? Jeez. No wonder the state's broke. We have no closed session today, so with that, we will adjourn today's April 3rd board meeting, and I will convey your warm wishes to my mother this evening for a happy and continued series of birthdays. Thank you all.